The morning Hattie Voss buried her mother, her brother handed her a document demanding she sign over the house before the casket reached the ground. It wasn't the worst thing Aldrin Voss had ever done to her, but it was the most calculated. Hattie Marlowe Voss, 37 years old, a mid-level project manager at a logistics firm in Columbus, Ohio, had spent most of her adult life being the quiet one, the responsible one, the daughter who called every Sunday, who drove 3 hours to fill prescriptions, who sat beside the hospital bed during the long weeks, when their mother, Ruth Ann Voss, could no longer walk to the bathroom without help. Aldrin sent flowers. Once. They arrived 2 days late, and the card had his assistant's handwriting on it. Ruth Ann had noticed. She noticed everything, even near the end, even when the morphine made her words slow and her eyes heavy. She noticed who came and who didn't. She noticed who held her hand through the night and who texted asking about the deed. Hattie didn't know, at the time, what her mother had done about it. She found out in the worst possible way. The funeral was held on a Wednesday in late October, at a small Methodist church on the east side of Columbus, where Ruth Ann had attended services for 31 years. The pews were filled with the kind of people her mother had loved. Neighbors, women from the quilting circle, a few retired nurses from the cardiac ward where Ruth Ann had volunteered for a decade after she stopped working. Real people. People who brought casseroles. People whose names Hattie actually knew. Aldrin arrived 20 minutes late with his wife, Petra Donnell Voss, a woman who wore sunglasses indoors and called Hattie sweetie in a tone that meant the opposite. Behind them came their daughter, Sasha, 19, who spent the service scrolling her phone under the pew. Hattie had chosen not to notice. It was her mother's funeral. She was trying to hold herself together with both hands. She managed to stay composed through the service, through the hymns, through the eulogy. She had written herself at 2 a.m. 3 days before, because Aldrin said he was too emotional to do it. She managed at the graveside, even when the wind came up off the field and pushed the smell of turned earth into her face, and something in her chest cracked clean in half. She managed through the reception at the house afterward, Ruth Ann's house, the white clapboard colonial on Sycamore Trace that Hattie had grown up in, the house where the Christmas tree always went in the bay window, and the kitchen smelled like burnt sugar every fall. She managed until Aldrin pulled her into the hallway outside the bathroom, away from the casserole crowd, and handed her a manila folder. "I need you to sign these today," he said. He wasn't whispering. He was using his business voice, the voice he used on calls when she could hear him through the wall. "The estate attorney says we can move faster if we have your signature before probate opens." Hattie looked at the folder, then at her brother. He was 51, 6 years older, wearing a suit that cost more than her car payment. He had their father's jaw and their mother's eyes, and right then she hated both those things. "What is this?" she said. "The house. I've already spoken to a realtor. The market's good right now, Hattie. We could split the proceeds in 60 days if you sign. We haven't even." She stopped, started again. "Mom hasn't been in the ground for 4 hours, Aldrin." He sighed. The kind of sigh that meant she was being emotional and he was being practical. "I know this is hard. But Mom would have wanted us to be sensible about this." Hattie put the folder back in his hand. She walked away without another word, because she knew if she said anything at all, she would say everything. Every Sunday call he missed, every ER visit she handled alone, every time Ruth Ann had said, quietly, into the phone at the end of a long night, "I don't know what I'd do without you, Hattie. I hope you know that." She walked into the kitchen and stood at the sink and looked out the window at the backyard, at the garden. Ru had maintained until the very last year, the one that was still putting out late-season asters in purple and white, even now, even in October. And she breathed, and she did not sign anything. What Hattie didn't know for another 11 days was that there was a second folder. Her mother's attorney was a woman named Claudette Osey, 63, a solo practitioner who had handled Ruth Ann's legal affairs for over 2 decades. She had an office on the second floor of a converted Victorian on 5th Avenue, above a tax preparation service, and her waiting room had a spider plant on the windowsill that had been there so long it had developed opinions. Hattie had been there once before, years ago, to witness a property document for her mother. She remembered Claudette as precise and unhurried, the kind of person who read everything twice before she said a word. The call came on a Thursday morning, 11 days after the funeral. Hattie was at her desk, staring at a logistics report she couldn't make herself care about. "Hattie," Claudette said, "I've been trying to reach your brother, but I think it's better we speak first. Your mother made some changes to her estate plan 18 months ago. The original will, which Aldrin may have reviewed with her at some point, was superseded. I want to walk you through what's actually in place before anyone does anything irreversible." Hattie sat very still. "What kind of changes?" The kind, Claudette said, that I think will make sense to you once you hear them. Can you come in tomorrow? She didn't sleep that night. She lay in the dark of her apartment, which was a reasonable apartment in a reasonable neighborhood, but which felt very small. When she was alone with something she couldn't turn off. She thought about her mother, about the last few months, the way Ruth Ann's lucidity came and went but never entirely left. She would be foggy about what day it was, and then sharply, precisely clear about something that mattered. About a conversation 2 years ago when Hattie had been helping her sort through old files, and her mother had said, out of nowhere, I've been thinking about what's fair, Hattie. Not just legally. What's actually fair's. Hattie had said something vague and reassuring. She hadn't pressed. She pressed herself now, lying in the dark, trying to remember what her mother's face had looked like when she said it. Calm. Decided. Like a woman who had been thinking about something for a long time and had finally reached the bottom of it. Claudette Osie's office smelled like coffee and old paper, which Hattie found comforting in a way she couldn't articulate. Claudette was already at her desk when Hattie came in, a thick file, open in front of her, reading glasses on the end of her nose. She gestured to the chair across from her without ceremony. Your mother came to me in April 2 years ago, Claudette said. She was concerned about something. She didn't say what exactly, but she asked me to pull the estate plan and go over it with her line by line. We met 4 times over about 6 weeks. She had questions, good ones. She looked at Hattie over her glasses. Your mother was a sharp woman. She was, Hattie said. She was also fair. Whatever she decided, she thought about it for a long time. I want you to understand that before I tell you what she decided. Hattie folded her hands in her lap. Okay. Claudette turned the file around on the desk so Hattie could see it. The house on Sycamore Trace, the white clapboard colonial, the bay window, the garden with the October asters, had been held in a revocable living trust since 2019. That Hattie knew. What she had not known, what Aldrin clearly had not known either, was that 18 months before she died, Ruth Ann had amended the trust. She had removed Aldrin as a co-trustee. She had renamed the sole successor trustee, Hattie Marlowe Voss. And not just the house. The trust held a savings account, a CD ladder, and a small brokerage account. Things Ruth Ann had accumulated over 30 years of careful living. Things that looked modest separately and added up to something significant together. The total value, Claudette said, setting a 1-page summary on the desk between them, was roughly $340,000. Hattie looked at the number, then at Claudette. She didn't tell me, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was just the truest thing she could say. She said she didn't want you to be burdened by it while she was still alive. Claudette said. She said. She opened a separate, smaller envelope and slid a handwritten note across the desk. She asked me to give you this when the time came. The note was on Ruth Ann's personal stationery, pale blue with a small flower at the top, the kind she'd used for birthday cards and thank you notes, as long as Hattie could remember. The handwriting was shaky in the later letters, the way it had gotten in the last year, but it was hers. Hattie, you never asked for anything. That was always your problem and my fault both. I watched for a long time and I saw what was real. The house goes to the one who stayed. Everything I built in this life should go to the person who helped me live it. That was you. It was always you. Be practical. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for what is yours. Love, Mum. Hattie read it twice. Then she folded it along its original crease and held it in both hands for a moment before she put it in her coat pocket. Aldrin doesn't know, she said. He knows what the original will said, Claudette confirmed. He doesn't know about the amendment. He was not a party to those meetings, and your mother was explicit that she wanted the timing controlled. When does he find out? When I contact him for the formal reading, which I can schedule at your discretion, within reason. Hattie thought about the manila folder in the hallway at her mother's house, about the realtor Aldrin said he'd already spoken to, about the 60-day timeline he'd drawn up before Ruth Ann's flowers had wilted. Schedule it, she said. The formal reading was held in Claudette's conference room, a small room with a rectangular table and chairs that didn't quite match. On a Monday afternoon 2 weeks later, Aldrin arrived first with Petra. He had brought the folder again. Hattie could see the edge of it in the leather portfolio he set on the table. He nodded at Hattie when she came in. The nod of a man who had already done the math. Claudette came in, set her files on the table, and began without small talk. She read the trust document in full. She was thorough and unhurried and did not editorialize. She read the amendment date, read the successor trustee designation, read the asset inventory. When she finished, she folded her hands on top of the file and looked at the room. The room was very quiet. Aldrin was looking at the summary page. His jaw was working, which Hattie had seen him do once before, years ago, when a business deal had gone wrong. Petra had taken off her sunglasses, which was something. This is a mistake, Aldrin said. His voice was level, which was almost more unsettling than if he'd raised it. "The document has been independently notarized and witnessed," Claudette said. "The amendment was executed at a time when your mother had full testamentary capacity, which I can attest to directly, as can the two witnesses present. There is no error. She wouldn't have done this without talking to me." "She did do this," Claudette said, "without talking to you. That was her prerogative." Aldrin turned to Hattie. Something moved across his face that she didn't entirely recognize, not just anger, but the specific scalded look of a person who had been certain of something and has discovered that certainty was never warranted. "You knew," he said. "I found out 2 weeks ago," she said. "Same as you, basically, that's not." He stopped. "The realtor. I already had conversations. Then you'll need to have different ones," she said it quietly. Not with triumph, not with cruelty. Just as a fact, the way her mother would have said it. The way a woman says something when she has been careful and patient, and she is done waiting for other people to catch up. Aldrin stared at her for a long moment, then he closed the portfolio. He picked it up. He and Petra left the conference room without another word, which was, in its way, the most honest thing either of them had done all day. Claudette walked Hattie out to the landing afterward and shook her hand. "Your mother was right about you," she said. Hattie didn't ask what that meant. She thought she knew. She drove back to the house on Sycamore Trace that afternoon. Her house now, though it would take time for that word to feel right in her mouth. She unlocked the front door with the key she'd kept for years on her own keyring. The same key she'd used to let herself in on Sunday mornings, when Ruthann needed help with the groceries or the pharmacy run. The house was exactly as her mother had left it. The Christmas tree stand was in the closet by the front door, waiting. The kitchen still had the faint ghost of burnt sugar in the walls. She stood in the middle of the living room for a while, not doing anything, just standing there in the late afternoon light that came through the bay window the way it always had, catching the dust in the air and turning it to gold. She took her mother's note out of her coat pocket and read it one more time. "The house goes to the one who stayed." She folded it again, put it back, and she began very quietly to know what it felt like to have been seen. The garden would need to be cut back before the first freeze, she thought. She would do it this weekend. She had the time.